They say that money can't buy class, but in my mother-in-law's world, it was the only thing that gave you a soul. My name is Ellie, and for 2 years, I was the charity case of the prestigious Sterling family. My mother-in-law, Victoria, and her daughter, Chloe, treated me like a stray dog they'd made the mistake of letting inside. They called me a gold digger, forced me to scrub their floors, and humiliated me at every high society gala. They thought I was a girl from the slums who'd tricked their son, Mark, into marriage. What they didn't know was that their precious family business, the one they used to look down on me, was currently being kept alive by a silent investment firm. An investment firm owned by my father. And today, I'm done being silent. I'm putting on my couture, taking back my name. And I'm going to show Victoria exactly what happens when you try to bully a woman who could buy and sell your entire lineage before lunch. Welcome to ThreadVerse. My marriage to Mark wasn't a business transaction. At least, not for me. I met Mark in a quiet coffee shop in downtown Seattle while I was trying to hide from my father's security detail. I wanted 1 year of normalcy. 1 year where I wasn't Ellie Vanguard, heiress to the Vanguard global empire. I just wanted to be Ellie, the girl who liked old books and rainy afternoons. Mark was perfect. He was a hard-working architect, kind, and completely oblivious to who my family was. When he proposed, I said yes, thinking that love would be enough to bridge any gap. But I hadn't met his mother, Victoria Sterling. The Sterlings were old money, or at least, they acted like it. They owned a mid-sized logistics company that was prestigious enough to get them into the local country club, but small enough that my father's company could have swallowed them as a tax write-off. The first time I met Victoria at their sprawling estate in Bellevue, she didn't even stand up to greet me. She looked at my off-the-rack sundress and my lack of designer jewelry with a disgust so thick you could have carved it with a steak knife. So, Victoria said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Mark tells me you're a teacher? From a small town in Ohio? How quaint. I suppose you're quite excited to be marrying into a family with actual prospects. I'm excited to be marrying Mark, Mrs. Sterling, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Of course you are, dear. Victoria's daughter, Chloe, piped in from the velvet sofa, not looking up from her phone. Who wouldn't want to jump from a studio apartment to a Sterling mansion? Just try not to get too comfortable. We have very high standards for the women who carry our name. I wanted to tell them then. I wanted to tell them that my studio apartment was a penthouse in Manhattan that my father bought me for my 18th birthday. But I looked at Mark, his hopeful, loving eyes, and I stayed silent. I wanted to know if they could ever love me for me. I got my answer on our wedding day. There was no grand ceremony for us. Victoria insisted on a private affair because she was too embarrassed to introduce my low-class family to her elite friends. My father, knowing my wish for a quiet year, played along, sending his assistant to stand in as my uncle. As I walked down the aisle, I heard Victoria whisper to one of her friends, "It's a shame, really. Mark could have had a senator's daughter. Instead, he's brought home a gold digger who probably doesn't know which fork to use for salad." I stood there in my simple white dress, a secret princess in a den of vultures, and I made a vow to myself. I will give them 1 year. 1 year to show me a shred of humanity. If they fail, I'll show them the true meaning of the word Sterling. The first 6 months of my marriage were a masterclass in psychological endurance. Mark was a wonderful husband, but he was constantly caught between his love for me and his loyalty to his mother. Victoria was a master of the passive-aggressive strike. Since Mark worked long hours to keep the family firm afloat, Victoria made sure my days were a living hell. She fired the cleaning staff the week after the honeymoon. "Since you aren't working, Ellie," Victoria said, handing me a pair of rubber gloves, "I don't see why we should pay for professional cleaners. It'll give you something to do besides spending my son's hard-earned money. I want the foyer marble polished by noon. And don't use the machine, it ruins the finish. Do it by hand." I spent my mornings on my hands and knees, scrubbing floors that were already clean. I spent my afternoons doing the laundry for Chloe, who would intentionally drop her silk dresses in the dirt just to see if I could get the stains out. "Careful with that, Ellie," Chloe would sneer, watching me work. "That dress costs more than your father probably made in a year. If you ruin it, I'll have Mark deduct it from your little allowance." I lived in a mansion, but I was treated like a ghost. I was barred from the main dining table when they had guests. Victoria would tell her friends I was indisposed or feeling unwell, when in reality, I was in the kitchen, preparing a 4-course meal that I wasn't allowed to eat with them. The irony was physically painful. While Victoria was bragging about her family's wealth and their global connections, I was receiving weekly reports from my father's lawyers. The Sterling logistics firm was failing. They were bleeding cash, their contracts were being canceled, and they were one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. One evening, I was in the kitchen cleaning up after one of Victoria's dinner parties. I heard my father-in-law, Charles, arguing with Victoria in the study. Victoria, we're in trouble, Charles said, his voice ragged. The bank called again. If we don't get a massive injection of capital by the end of the month, we're going to lose the estate. Everything we've built is going to vanish. Then find an investor. Victoria snapped. Talk to the Vanguard group. I hear they're looking for mid-sized acquisitions. We have the heritage, they have the cash. It's a perfect match. The Vanguard group doesn't take meetings with people like us. Victoria, Charles sighed. They're titans. We're a rounding error to them. I stood in the kitchen, a damp dish towel in my hand, and smiled to myself. I knew exactly who the head of acquisitions at the Vanguard group was. He was a man named Arthur, and he had been my babysitter when I was 6 years old. I could have ended their misery with a single phone call. I could have saved their company and earned their gratitude. But as I looked at the red, raw skin on my hands from the cleaning chemicals Victoria forced me to use, I realized that gratitude wasn't in their vocabulary. They didn't need a savior. They needed a lesson. The breaking point came at the annual Founders Gala, the biggest social event of the year for the Bellevue elite. Victoria had spent weeks preparing for it, buying a new couture gown and a diamond necklace that she definitely couldn't afford. I wasn't supposed to go, but at the last minute, Mark's original date, the daughter of a potential investor, canceled. Victoria was forced to let me come, but she made her conditions clear. You will stay 3 paces behind me at all times, Victoria hissed as we stood in the foyer of the grand ballroom. You will not speak unless spoken to. And for heaven's sake, don't tell anyone you were a teacher. Tell them you're a private assistant. It sounds slightly less pathetic. I wore a simple black dress. It was elegant, but to Victoria's untrained eye, it looked cheap. She didn't realize it was a custom piece from a Parisian designer who only made 10 dresses a year. As we walked through the ballroom, Victoria was in her element, networking and lying about their family's success. Then, she saw him. Arthur, the head of acquisitions for the Vanguard Group. He was surrounded by a crowd of people, all vying for his attention. There he is, Victoria whispered to Chloe. This is our chance. If we can get Arthur to notice us, the Sterling name is saved. Victoria shoved her way through the crowd, dragging me along like an unwanted accessory. Mr. Sterling. Arthur. What a pleasure to see you again, she chirped, putting on her most regal face. Arthur looked at her, his expression polite but bored. Mrs. Sterling. A pleasure. Arthur, I'd love to discuss the merger proposal we sent over. Our logistics network is. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. Arthur interrupted, his eyes scanning the room. I'm actually here on a very specific mission. I'm looking for someone very important. Someone who has been out of pocket for a while. Victoria's eyes lit up. She actually thought he was talking about her. Well, I'm right here. And my daughter, Chloe, is a graduate of. Mom, stop, Chloe whispered, but it was too late. Arthur's eyes finally landed on me, standing 3 paces behind Victoria. His entire face transformed. The bored mask dropped, replaced by a look of profound respect and relief. Ellie, Arthur said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding elite to hear. Is that you? Your father has been worried sick. He's been calling me every day for an update. The ballroom went silent. Victoria turned around, looking at me as if I'd suddenly grown a second head. Arthur, you know our assistant? Victoria stammered, her voice trembling. Arthur laughed, a sharp, cold sound. Assistant? Mrs. Sterling, I think you've made a grave error. This is Eleanor Vanguard, the sole heiress to the Vanguard global empire, and the woman who, as of 5 minutes ago, officially owns your family's debt. I stepped forward, no longer 3 paces behind. I looked Victoria dead in the eye, and for the first time in a year, I let the Vanguard heiress out. Hello, Victoria, I said, my voice like silk and steel. I think it's time we discuss the housekeeping, starting with yours. The silence in the ballroom wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a car crash, before the screaming starts. Every socialite in Bellevue, every investor Victoria had tried to impress, was staring at me. Or rather, they were staring at Arthur, the most powerful man in the room, who was currently bowed at a 45-degree angle in front of the girl they'd all spent the last hour ignoring. Victoria's face didn't just go pale, it went a sickly, translucent gray. She looked like a statue that had been left out in the rain for too long. Arthur. You must be mistaken, Victoria stammered, her voice thin and reedy. This is Ellie. She's a teacher from Ohio. She doesn't have a penny to her name. She's my daughter-in-law. Yes, but she's practically a servant. Arthur straightened up, and the look he gave Victoria was enough to freeze a volcano. A servant? Mrs. Sterling, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. You are speaking to the primary beneficiary of the Vanguard Global Trust. You are speaking to the woman whose signature determines whether your company exists tomorrow or is sold for its copper wiring. I felt a surge of cold, sharp satisfaction. I looked at Chloe, who was standing beside her mother. She had dropped her champagne glass. It lay shattered on the marble floor, a perfect metaphor for their family's reputation. Gold digger, wasn't it, Chloe? I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent crowd. That's what you called me this morning while I was scrubbing the stains out of your silk dress? The dress, by the way, that my father's textile firm manufactured. Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No insults came out. No SNY comments. Just a pathetic, muffled sob. Ellie, darling. Victoria started, stepping forward with her hands outstretched, trying to put on that fake, aristocratic smile. There's obviously been a huge misunderstanding. Why didn't you tell us? We would have treated you so differently. We would have celebrated you. That's the problem, Victoria, I said, stepping away from her touch. You only celebrate people you can use. You only show respect to a bank balance. For a year, I gave you every chance to show me a shred of humanity. I showed you what a daughter-in-law looks like. And you showed me what a monster looks like. I turned back to Arthur. Arthur, what is the status of the Sterling Logistics debt? We acquired the final 30% of their outstanding loans 20 minutes ago, Eleanor, Arthur said, checking his watch. Technically, Vanguard Global is now the primary lien holder of the Sterling estate, their warehouses, and their private fleet. Good, I said. Prepare a full audit. I want to know exactly how much of my father's money Victoria has been spending on her couture while her husband was begging the banks for a stay of execution. And Victoria? She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. Don't worry about polishing the marble tomorrow. You won't be here to see it. If Arthur was a storm, my father, William Vanguard, was an earthquake. An hour after the gala revelation, the Sterling mansion was surrounded, not by police, but by a fleet of black SUVs and a legal team that looked like they were ready to invade a small country. I was sitting in the grand study, the room Victoria used to bar me from entering, when the front doors were thrown open with such force that the crystal chandelier in the foyer rattled. My father walked in. William Vanguard didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a force of nature. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Victoria's entire jewelry collection, and his eyes were burning with a protective fury I'd only seen once before, when someone had tried to short his stock in the 90s. Where is she? William's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. Victoria and Charles, my father-in-law, came running into the foyer, looking absolutely terrified. Charles was shaking so hard, he had to lean against the wall. Mr. Vanguard. Charles gasped. Sir, please, we had no idea. If we had known Ellie was your daughter. William didn't even look at him. He walked straight past them to where I was standing. He looked at my hands. The hands Victoria had forced me to use to scrub floors with harsh chemicals. He saw the faint redness around my cuticles. I've never seen my father's face turn that particular shade of dark, thunderous red. You made her scrub floors? William whispered, his voice more terrifying than any shout. You made the heiress to the Vanguard Empire act as your domestic servant? It was just a misunderstanding. Victoria cried, her voice reaching a frantic, hysterical pitch. We were just teaching her the value of hard work. It's a family tradition. Your family doesn't have traditions, Victoria, my father spat, turning to face her. Your family has a history of riding on the backs of people better than you. You wanted to know the value of hard work? Fine. My legal team has just filed a civil suit for emotional distress, labor violations, and intentional infliction of psychological harm. You can't do that. Chloe screamed from the stairs. We're the Sterlings. You're the debtors, my father corrected her. Arthur stepped forward with a stack of legal documents. Mr. Sterling, as of this moment, your residence at this property is terminated. The Vanguard Group is exercising its right as the primary creditor to seize the assets immediately due to the fraudulent concealment of financial liabilities in your merger proposal. Seize the assets. Charles whispered. You mean we have to leave? No, my father said, a dark smile touching his lips. You don't just have to leave. You have to pay. Every cent of the salary you didn't pay my daughter for her service over the last year, I'm billing you for it at the rate of a top-tier executive consultant. That's $5,000 an hour. For a year of work. Do the math, Charles. You don't just lose the house. You lose your future. I watched as the men in suits began tagging the furniture, the antique chairs, the paintings, the silver I had polished with my own blood and sweat. It was being taken back. But I wasn't looking at the furniture. I was looking for Mark. I found Mark in our bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He hadn't come to the gala. He'd been working late at the office, trying to save a company that I had already bought. Mark, I said softly. He looked up. His eyes were red, and he looked like a man who had watched his entire world crumble in a single phone call. Is it true, Ellie? He asked, his voice hollow. All of it? The Vanguard thing? The debt? My mother? Making you clean the house like a servant? It's true, Mark, I said, walking over to him. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you 100 times. But I needed to know if you'd stand up for me without knowing I had billions behind me. I needed to know if your love was stronger than your mother's shadow. I tried, Ellie, he whispered. I argued with her. I told her to be kind. But I didn't know she was making you do those things while I was at work. I thought you were just helping out. I was so focused on the business, on saving us. That's the problem, Mark, I said, a tear finally escaping my eye. You were so focused on the business that you didn't see your wife was drowning right in front of you. You let her treat me like trash because it was easier than standing up to her. Silence is a choice, Mark. And you chose her peace over my dignity. What happens now? He asked. My father is moving the Sterlings out tonight. They're being moved to a 2-bedroom apartment near the warehouses. It's a modest space, according to Arthur. Victoria will have to learn how to use a washing machine. Chloe will have to get a job at a retail store. Mark looked at me, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. And us? Ellie, I love you. I didn't care about the money. I married the teacher from Ohio, not the Vanguard heiress. I know you did, Mark. And that's why I'm giving you a choice. I pulled out a single key from my pocket. Not a key to a mansion, but the key to the small cottage we'd looked at during our honeymoon, the one by the lake that we both loved. My father wants to destroy your family, Mark. And he has every right to. But I still see the man I met in that coffee shop. If you want to stay with them, to help them rebuild their honor in that small apartment, I wish you luck. But if you want to be the man I thought you were, you leave this house tonight. You don't take a penny of Sterling money. You come with me, and we start over. No Vanguards. No Sterlings. Just us. Ellie. But know this, I said, my voice hardening. If you choose them, you never see me again. I won't be the woman who stays silent while a family of vultures picks at my soul. Make your choice, Mark. The black SUVs are leaving in 10 minutes. I walked out of the room, leaving him in the wreckage of his mother's pride. As I walked down the grand staircase for the last time, I saw Victoria being escorted out the door. She was clutching a single designer handbag, sobbing as a mover took a painting off the wall behind her. Ellie, please, she cried when she saw me. Tell your father to stop. We're family. I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. We were never family, Victoria, I said to the empty foyer. We were just a business transaction you failed to close. I stepped out into the night air, where my father was waiting by the car. Did he choose? My father asked. I looked at the front door. The lights of the mansion were flickering as the power was being transferred to the new owner's account. And then, I saw a figure emerge. Mark was walking down the steps. He had no suitcase. He had no designer watch. He just had his jacket and the look of a man who had finally found his backbone. He chose, I whispered. The Vanguard heiress was going home. But the teacher from Ohio? She was finally starting her life. They say that the view from the top is breathtaking, but the fall to the bottom? That's where you truly learn to breathe. Victoria Sterling had spent 30 years building a pedestal made of other people's insecurities. She thought the world was divided into those who give orders and those who take them. She was about to find out that when the Vanguard group takes your house, they don't just take the furniture, they take your pride with them. Welcome to the reality check of a lifetime. The apartment Arthur had chosen for the Sterlings wasn't a slum, but to Victoria, it might as well have been a prison cell. It was an 800-square-foot, 2-bedroom unit in a gray, industrial part of the city. The windows didn't overlook the sparkling waters of Lake Washington. They overlooked a sprawling warehouse and a noisy freeway. I stood in the doorway as the movers dropped their final 3 suitcases, the only things they were allowed to keep, onto the beige, wall-to-wall carpeting. Where is the master suite? Victoria asked, her voice trembling as she looked around the cramped living room. And why is it so loud? There's a constant humming in the walls. That's the sound of the city, Victoria, I said, leaning against the doorframe. And that humming? That's the communal HVAC system. You share it with 20 other families. There is no master suite. Just 2 rooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen where you'll be doing your own dishes. Victoria walked to the small kitchenette, her fingers tracing the laminate countertops with a look of pure revulsion. She looked for a button, a buzzer to call a maid, a servant, anyone. But there were no buttons here. Just a sink full of cold water and a manual for a 10-year-old stove. You can't do this, Ellie, Chloe sobbed, sitting on her suitcase. I have a reputation. My friends are going to see me here. I have an Instagram following to maintain. Your reputation was built on my father's credit line, Chloe, I reminded her. And as for your followers? They like the girl in the private jet. I doubt they'll care much for the girl taking the number 42 bus to her new job. Job? Chloe shrieked. I don't have a job. I've never had a job. You do now, I said, handing her a folder. I've taken the liberty of setting up an interview for you at a local retail store. It's part of your repayment plan. If you want your personal debts settled, you'll work 40 hours a week. And Victoria, you'll be managing the household. No more charity galas. Just grocery lists and budget spreadsheets. I walked out, leaving the sound of their combined hysterics behind me. It was a cold victory, but as I looked at the red marks on my own hands that were finally starting to heal, I knew that the structure of their new life was exactly what they had designed for me. 2 weeks into their rehabilitation, I decided to see how the Sterlings were adjusting to the real world. I chose a Tuesday afternoon, the day Chloe started her shift at a generic mall clothing brand. I watched from a distance as Chloe, once the girl who wouldn't wear anything that wasn't custom-tailored, struggled to fold a stack of $20 t-shirts. Her movements were slow, her face a mask of miserable boredom. Suddenly, a group of girls walked into the store. I recognized them immediately. They were the inner circle Chloe used to rule over at the country club. "Oh my God, Chloe," one of the girls gasped, pointing at her name tag. "Is that actually you? We heard the rumors about the bankruptcy, but working in a mall? Are you serious?" Chloe looked like she wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. It's just a temporary project," she stammered, trying to hide her hands. I'm consulting for the brand." "Consulting?" Another girl laughed, picking up a shirt Chloe had just folded. "You're folding shirts, Chloe, and you're doing it badly. Come on, girls, let's go to the boutique across the street. This place smells like poverty." I saw Chloe's eyes well up with tears as her friends walked away, laughing. It was a brutal lesson, but a necessary one. She was learning that when the money vanishes, the loyalty she'd bought with it vanishes even faster. Meanwhile, Victoria was facing her own nightmare. She had tried to call her old gal pals for a bridge game, only to find that her number had been blocked by almost everyone. She finally managed to get one former friend on the phone, begging for a lunch date at their usual high-end spot. "Oh, Victoria, darling," the woman had said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "I'd love to, really, but the club has concerns about your outstanding membership fees. It's a bit awkward, don't you think? Maybe we can do a coffee at that little stand by the bus stop instead?" Victoria had hung up the phone and cried for 3 hours. She wasn't crying because she missed her friends. She was crying because she realized she was no longer a Sterling. She was just a woman in a small apartment who didn't know how to boil an egg. They were learning the most important architectural rule of all. A facade is only as strong as the building behind it. And their building was empty. A month into their exile, Victoria decided to make one last play. She didn't come to me. She knew I was untouchable. Instead, she waited outside my father's corporate headquarters, hoping to catch him as he left for the day. When William Vanguard emerged from the building, surrounded by his security detail, Victoria threw herself in front of his car. "William, please," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "You have to listen to me. You're a father. You know what it's like to want the best for your children. My Mark, he's suffering. He's living in that tiny cottage, working a construction job. You're destroying our family for a grudge." My father stopped. He looked at her, not with anger, but with a terrifying, clinical indifference. He motioned for his security to wait and stepped closer to her. "I am a father, Victoria," William said, his voice as cold as a mountain peak. "And because I am a father, I watched my daughter come home with chemical burns on her hands. I watched her hide in the kitchen like a criminal because you told her she wasn't good enough to sit at your table. You didn't want the best for your children. You wanted to feed your own ego by starving hers. We'll pay it back," Victoria pleaded, clutching his sleeve. "I'll do anything. Just give us back the house. Give us back our name." "Your name is exactly what you made it, Victoria," a new voice said. I stepped out from behind my father. I was wearing a suit that cost more than their new apartment, but my eyes were the same ones she'd spent a year ignoring. "Ellie," Victoria whispered, her eyes darting between us. "I have a final offer for you, Victoria," I said, handing her a legal envelope. Inside is a debt of dignity contract. My father will drop the civil lawsuits. He will stop the forensic audit that would likely land Charles in prison for tax evasion. In exchange, you sign a total gag order. You never speak the Vanguard or Sterling names again. You move to a different state. And you never, ever contact Mark or me again. "A different state?" Victoria gasped. "But our life is here." "Your life here is a crime scene, Victoria," I said. "You have 24 hours to sign. If you don't, Arthur will release the full story to every news outlet in the country. The Sterling scandal. How a millionaire bully lost it all to her servant daughter-in-law. Imagine the social standing you'll have then." Victoria looked at the envelope. She looked at the towering glass skyscraper of the Vanguard empire. She finally realized that the war wasn't just over. She had never even stood a chance. She took the envelope with a shaking hand and walked away, her shoulders slumped, her regal walk gone forever. I looked at my father. Is it over? The demolition is complete, Ellie, he said, putting an arm around my shoulder. Now, it's time to see what Mark builds on the site. They say that time is the ultimate architect. It smooths out the rough edges of a tragedy and hardens the foundation of a new beginning. It had been exactly 1 year since the night the Sterling mansion went dark. 1 year since the Golden family was dismantled by the very woman they tried to break. People asked me if I felt guilty for taking it all away. But looking back, I didn't take anything that wasn't already hollow. I just pulled back the curtain and let the sunlight show the rot. And in that year, the world had changed in ways Victoria Sterling never could have imagined. The 1-year anniversary of the Sterling collapse wasn't marked by a gala or a party. I spent the morning in my new office on the 82nd floor of the Vanguard global headquarters. I wasn't just the heiress anymore. I was the chief operating officer of a new division dedicated to ethical acquisitions and employee protection, a division inspired by the year I spent as a servant. My father, William, walked into my office, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. He handed me a tablet with a live feed of a local news report. Thought you might want to see the progress of our graduates, Ellie, he said with a small, knowing smile. The news report was a segment on local resilience. It featured a small, cluttered thrift store on the outskirts of the city. There, behind the counter, was a woman who looked vaguely like Victoria Sterling. Her hair was no longer a perfect platinum blonde. It was a natural, dusty gray. She wasn't wearing Dior. She was wearing a faded store apron and a look of quiet, exhausted resignation. She was haggling with a customer over the price of a used toaster. The woman who once spent $50,000 on a single rug was now fighting for 50 cents. She's actually become their top salesperson. Arthur's voice came from the doorway. He had entered with a stack of reports. It turns out Victoria's talent for judging people and being aggressive is quite effective in the secondhand market. She's living in that small apartment, paying her own bills. She doesn't have a mansion, but for the first time in her life, she's actually earning her keep. And Chloe? I asked. Chloe is still a receptionist at that retail firm, Arthur replied. She was fired 3 times in the first 6 months for attitude problems, but she finally realized that no one was coming to save her. She's currently dating a guy who works as a delivery driver. I hear they're sharing a studio apartment. She doesn't post on Instagram much anymore. It turns out, reality doesn't have a Sterling filter. I felt a strange sense of peace. I didn't hate them anymore. They were finally just people. They had been stripped of the armor of wealth, and in that nakedness, they were forced to grow a soul. But the real success story was at home. That evening, I drove to the lake cottage, the one I had offered to Mark the night he chose me. It wasn't a mansion, but it was beautiful. It was made of cedar, glass, and honesty. Mark was on the porch, his drafting table set up overlooking the water. He had started his own firm, Sterling Architects. He didn't take any startup capital from my father. He started small, taking on residential projects and community centers. He wanted to build structures that lasted, not facades that shimmered. How was the empire today? Mark asked, standing up to kiss me. The empire is stable, I smiled. But the architect looks tired. Have you been working on the new library plans again? It's a complex project, Ellie, he said, pulling me close. The soil on the site is soft. I have to be very careful with the deep pile foundations. If the base isn't perfect, the whole library will tilt in 10 years. You've learned well, Mark, I whispered. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. We were a billionaire heiress and a working architect, but in that moment, we were just 2 people who had survived the storm. My father-in-law, Charles, had eventually reached out to us. He was working as a junior accountant for a mid-sized firm, living a quiet life. He and Mark had reconciled, and occasionally, Charles would come over for a quiet dinner. He was the only one who had truly apologized, not for the money, but for the silence. He admitted that he had let Victoria's ambition drown out his own conscience. As for Victoria and Chloe, they had signed a gag order. They were out of our lives, living a life of modest means in another county. Sometimes, I'd wonder if Victoria still looked at the marble floors in her apartment and thought of me. I hoped she did, not out of malice, but as a reminder that the person scrubbing the floor today might be the one who owns the building tomorrow. I looked at my hands. The chemical burns were long gone. My skin was smooth, but I could still feel the phantom weight of the scrub brush. It was a weight that kept me grounded. It reminded me that wealth isn't a shield, it's a responsibility. The Sterling name was no longer a symbol of hollow prestige. In Mark's hands, it was becoming a symbol of integrity. And in my hands, the Vanguard name was becoming a symbol of justice. We weren't just the secret millionaire and the architect. We were the builders of a new legacy, one where the foundation was made of truth and the view. The view was finally perfectly clear. Thanks for staying with us until the very end of this incredible journey. Ellie's story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't found in their bank account, but in how they treat those who can do absolutely nothing for them. Victoria Sterling thought she was a queen, but she was just a bully in a high-end dress. And Ellie? She proved that you can take the girl out of the mansion, but you can't take the strength out of a woman who knows her own worth. If you cheered when Arthur revealed Ellie's true identity at the gala, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It really helps the ThreadVerse community reach more people who need to see that karma always finds the right address. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We bring you daily stories of justice, revenge, and the incredible twists of fate that keep us all on our toes. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were above you? How did you prove them wrong? I read every single one of your stories, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this one. Stay loyal, stay sharp, and always remember, money can buy a house, but it can never buy the character required to live in it. I'll see you in the next one.